Everyone, welcome. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is a joint meeting of the Monroe County Commissioners, City of Bloomington's Mayor, Monroe County Council, and the City of Bloomington Common Council. And I do want to thank everyone at the Convention Center for hosting this meeting, for the public in attendance. Sorry you have to look at the back of us. And Kat for ensuring our transparency. Thank you, Kat. This is a work session, so for the public present today, please understand we have a great deal to discuss, and we won't be taking public comment at this meeting. You will very likely have many opportunities at future meetings to offer your commentary in front of the councils or the commissioners, or you can contact the mayor as well. Thank you to each and every one of you, the elected officials who are present today. We would like to go around the room, have everybody just give your name, and we'll start with Ms. Munson.
Cheryl Munson, Monroe County Council.
Marty Hawk, Monroe County Council.
Jeff McKim, Monroe County Council.
Eric Spoonmore, Monroe County Council.
John Hamilton, Mayor.
Lee Jones, Monroe County Commissioner.
Julie Thomas, Monroe County Commissioner. Eddie Gibbons, Monroe County Commissioner.
Dorothy Granger, Vice President of Bloomington Common Council.
Dave Rollo, President, Bloomington City Council.
Steve Volan, City Council.
Andy Ruff, City Council.
Isabel Piedmont Smith, City Council.
Chris Durbin, City Council.
Bloomington City Council at large.
Thank you all. The county commissioners recognized that there were a lot of different ideas about this convention center as we spoke with various city councilors, the mayor, county councilors, and we appreciate that everyone came together today to have a dialogue, to develop a deeper understanding of the finances, just the first part of this convention center, and if we have time, to hopefully gain a clear understanding of the financing of ongoing operations once the convention center is built. City Councilor Steve Volan has offered to serve as timekeeper, but it's for this group to determine the amount of time allotted for each comment. Would someone like to make a suggestion for how long each comment or question should be from each member? We'll have second go-rounds, etc.
What Steve has.
Mr. Volan?
I would suggest that both comments and question periods where somebody asks a question and the answer that they get from somebody else, they both be limited to 3 minutes per person. I'll welcome a second.
Anyone else have other suggestions?
Second.
Are we good with 3 minutes, everyone? Unanimous consent?
Yes.
3? Okay, great. Mr. Volan is going to keep time, and he's going to explain how that works.
I'll demonstrate it very briefly. I use an app called Multi-Timer, and this is when the comment period begins, you'll hear a beep. When it's time to wrap up, within 1 minute or 30 seconds, you'll hear a gong. And when your time is up, the beep will come back and it won't stop until you're done, like that.
Great.
So if anybody has any questions, that's what we're going to use this time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
You're
Volan, for
welcome.
doing that. I appreciate your willingness to serve us in that capacity. Let's also agree not to interrupt one another as we're commenting, speaking. What we'll do is we'll have the first section of this meeting with bond counsel financial consultants from the city, working for the city of Bloomington, and we can do a go-around where everybody has an opportunity to comment or ask questions, and then we'll take additional comments and questions. Once that initial round has ended, if you want to make a comment, just raise your hand. One of the three of us will notice you. We're going to keep a list. Are you timing?
No, sorry.
We're going to keep a list so that we ensure that everybody's heard. You don't keep your hand raised for terribly long. So just look for us to give you a nod that we've acknowledged that you've raised your hand. Okay? And we will try to ensure everyone has the opportunity to speak before we go to somebody for a second or third go round. All right. As issues are raised beyond the scope of finances, we will add them to the list over here. Commissioner Githens will be doing that to ensure that we address those at some point. So the first part of the meeting concerns the financing the construction of the new convention center, parking garage, renovation of the current center, and relevant connection facilities. The Convention Center Steering Committee recommended a convention center project that totals $59 million. Mayor Hamilton, we thank you for inviting bond counsel and financial consultants for the city of Bloomington. We've set aside 10 minutes. Please introduce them for their presentations, and then we'll have time for questions, comments, and all that good stuff. Thank you.
Before we get into that, may I just ask, would it make sense to try to set some target time amounts for the different subsections? For example, under section 3 on structure of future meetings, I'd like to make sure we have some time to talk about that. We don't have a strict ending time, but I know some of us have a target. So do we want to set target lengths of each subsection? I might ask for 30 minutes for section 3. Do we want to try for 1 hour for section 2? Something like that.
I think our goal is to try to deal with each piece completely, and definitely leaving time at the end as much as possible to discuss that structure, the future structure of our meetings. We'll try for a half an hour, but I don't know how the first two parts of the meeting are going to go.
I would be okay with, no more than an hour and a half on the initial stuff, so that we can get, we're already,
Yep.
well into the meeting.
Right.
So,
Right.
but a maximum 90 minutes.
Good.
So go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Great, thanks very much. I will just also turn around briefly, welcome everybody. I appreciate you all being here. This is an important event. I will say I'm a little sorry this wasn't a joint meeting, but we'll make it work, and we're very excited about the prospect to go forward with this. I am very pleased with the progress that we've had as a community on the convention center. I think there's a lot of great opportunity ahead. I also regret we won't have public comment tonight, but I do have a suggestion, which is if you want to do comments, you can do hashtag convention expansion. And if any of you want to comment on tweeting, live tweeting, or Facebook or other things, and you hashtag convention expansion in any of your posts, that would help the dialogue, and we can also assemble those for those of you who have comments as we go along. We're very glad to have with us two advisors who've done a lot of work on this. You're going to hear from Buzz Crone, who's the principal at Crone and Associates, Municipal Finance Advice. We also have Bruce Donaldson from Barnes & Thornburg, who've been bond counsel. I'm going to hand it over to them to talk about funding sources available to construct the convention center. Thank you, Buzz.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, and appreciate everybody being here today. We're going to go through four quick bullet points, and we'll try to be brief. But we've been working with Jeff Underwood and Bruce Donaldson for several months on this project. One of the things we've been doing is tracking the food and beverage revenues that have been coming in over the past roughly 18 months. And obviously, we're going to be focusing just on the city's portion of that revenue. That's all we're talking about in terms of having be the primary pledge towards the repayment of the convention center bonds. Then we'll get into some bond sizing calculations and show you what sort of is the preferred route at this point. Obviously, this is very preliminary, so please stay tuned. The project that's being proposed at this particular time would include, it was based on the recommendation of the steering committee, 30,000 square foot exhibit hall, 60,000 gross square feet. Oh. Can everybody hear me okay? And estimated cost is about $44 million, and that would include $37 million for the expansion portion and $7 million for the renovation and connection to the existing facility that we're here in using right now. In addition to the convention center expansion project, the city is also undertaking independently another parking garage that would accommodate somewhere between 500 and 550 spaces. That's estimated to cost about $15 million, and the city would be looking to the other revenue sources other than food and beverage tax revenues, probably TIF, maybe some other resources as well. So that's sort of a project overview. Oop. Jumped a little ahead of myself, sorry. Okay, this shows basically a monthly breakdown of all the food and beverage revenue that's come in to date up through July of 2019. It shakes out about 88–89% on the city side, and that's the part that's going to be pledged 100% towards the convention center project. We then wanted to look at how we're doing so far in the second year. We actually started getting collections in February, March, but April of 2018 is really when we were seeing sort of a routine, normal cash flow. And you can see where the spikes are. May's a little bit of a spike. I guess that's the IU graduation. And then October's seems to be a pretty busy month with homecoming, football games, et cetera. So, but the first 4 months of year two are up about 16–17% from the first 4 months of year one, if you will. So we are seeing some positive trending in that respect. This just sort of graphically displays the monthly cash flow from food and beverage revenues. And then at the top, we have a 12-month rolling average. And again, that has been on an upward trend. We started the first 12 months, we averaged about 2.88 million. The 12 months ending July of this year, our average was a little over $3 million a month for. And that would be the revenue stream that would be used to repay the proposed revenue bonds that we're contemplating for the $44 million of project costs. We did look at a number of options for the financing in terms of what time period, 20-year, 25-year, 30-year, and whether or not we wanted to have a little bit of a cushion on the revenue pledge. The first line under each of those different three scenarios shows that we would, if we size the bond to equal 91% of our 12-month rolling average, that gives us a little cushion where maybe we wouldn't have to invoke any of the backup pledges that would probably be necessary to sell the bonds. We'll have to have some credit enhancements. The one-for-one scenario is in the middle. That first one with the yellow line is sort of our baseline scenario. And then if we continue to grow in between now and when we were to pull the trigger on issuing these bonds, we just show an illustration of if we had an additional 10% growth in between now and whenever the bonds were to be issued, that might give us a little bit higher bonding capacity. Obviously, the longer period of time you go out, that helps bring the bond payments down a little bit. Interest rates go up a little bit. We looked at the 25 and 30-year terms. I think the city felt more comfortable with the 20-year term, since many things will need to be renovated at the end of 20 years, as we all know from experience probably in this building as well as other buildings that the city and county operate. So that's sort of the preferred option, and we're pretty close to that $44 million mark at that point.
Sorry, a little loud.
Pardon me? Okay. I think Bruce, do you have anything you wanted to add to that, or? But
Good evening, Bruce Donaldson with Barnes and Thornburg. I don't want to get too much into the legal weeds. I don't think you probably do either, but a lot of the legal part will actually be dictated by decisions that you make on how this financing ends up getting funded. it will kind of dictate what legal structures we use. I'll just mention a couple of things, and then of course I'll be here to answer questions if you have questions on legal or legal structure as we go along this evening. One is that food and beverage financings for the city would count against the city's debt limit if we did a direct bond, so we would likely need to do this as a lease financing, as you've done on a lot of major capital projects. Most municipalities and school corporations and so forth do a lot of their major capital projects as lease financings. I think this building itself was done on a lease financing through the Monroe County Convention Center Building Corporation. So that's one thing that we'll have to keep in mind as we start thinking about legal structure. The other is that there is some outstanding debt on this facility, and this facility is mortgaged to that debt, along with, I think, a little bit of the surrounding property. So we'll have to be mindful of that as we think through how to do the legal structure. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to put out on the table, and we can, again, address questions as we go along.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll begin questioning to my left with Ms. Granger.
What is the debt on this property?
I believe it's on the order of 4 million, or 3.6 million right now, and it was there were two notes that were issued in 2016 that actually refinanced some prior debt. One's a tax exempt rate and one's a taxable rate, and so I guess it's about 3.6 million.
Thank you. Anything else from you? Or?
No, thank you.
Okay. We go to Mr. Spoonmore.
So the bond capacity is, if at the baseline scenario, the preferred option is $42,738,000, right?
Yes.
And which we had always kind of assumed was going to be around $30 million, $30 to $35 million. So this is a substantial increase from that original assumption, right?
I wasn't aware of the $30 million cap. We've just been working with the. Thank you. I wasn't aware of the $30 million discussion. We've just been working with a range of numbers, and I think the 44 million is what came out of the steering committee recommendation.
Okay.
Thank you.
That does include renovation of this building too, though. So we're at about 37 million on the expansion part.
Okay.
Do you have other questions right now?
Not right now.
Okay. Mr. Rello.
Thank you. So the average of $3 million per month in revenue, I want to address that.
That's the rolling 12-month average. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's more like about 280 to 300,000 per month.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's, my question is, in the event of an economic downturn, have you factored in a drop in revenue, because this is based on food and beverage, which is discretionary spending for people? And and if so, or as part of that consideration, do you have an historical analog that you've considered, say 2008?
Well, the food and beverage tax is new to Monroe County, so all the data that we have so far has been, yes, probably in the good times. There would need to be a credit enhancement under any scenario to make these bonds marketable and to get the city's AA bond rating. And we would probably look to the local income tax as the pledge backup, but then we could also use TIF to actually make those payments. But we need to keep the TIF pledge probably in our back pocket, because we've got another parking garage to build, and we're going through 2 of those right now. So that's sort of the plan to make the bonds marketable. But yeah, there would be, and that's, like we said on the, if we felt uncomfortable at the current rolling average, which is up to a little over $3 million, perhaps we'd want to consider, maybe 110% coverage ratio, which would be setting that cap at 91% of the 12-month rolling average. But in terms of trying to predict when and how much a downturn might do, we have not really, it would be factored into the use of potential use of TIF would be the likely place, but we would, the local income tax pledge would get the bonds your high AA GO bond rating. So if that's kind of dancing around the question.
So I understand. So in other words, the lit or the TIF are backups essentially, and it's also ensure that we maintain bond rating as we do. My concern is that we anticipate that there probably would be some sort of economic downturn just because business cycles occur. So that's my concern. Yeah, thanks.
Good point.
Mr. Volk?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that the October 2018 number, I mean, the Food and Beverage Tax Advisory Committee saw an uptick in compliance that month, and it had just started in February. So I think that figure is explained by the auditor finally catching up to all the people who hadn't yet complied.
I see.
I don't think you're going to see a spike in October of this year, but we'll see in November.
Yeah.
But my question is, first of all, can we go back to the original chart, the 1-to-1? What is that 1-to-1?
1-for-1 coverage means that we would set the bond payment equal to the 12-month rolling average, basically. It'd be similar to the baseline, but we're assuming that
The baseline is 100%, but it doesn't cover the...
the baseline would cover it, but if there was a shortfall, we would have to potentially invoke the backup.
You mean in the 1-to-1 scenario or in the baseline 100% scenario?
Well, the baseline is what the current 12-month average is, that baseline. So the 1-for-1, I just wanted to differentiate that because that's a projection if we had 10% more growth in the food and beverage revenues. So we're not there. I just wanted to show sort of a range, a conservative range and a more aggressive range, but right now the sizing, yes, sir.
Okay, the other question may be for the mayor. What does, or maybe Mr. Underwood, what does credit enhancements pledge from the city mean exactly?
So when you're looking at bonds, you look at two issues. Is one, the size of the bonds and the amount of revenue necessary to pay the annual debt service. So this middle baseline talks to that says we have enough funds to sell a bond of about $42.7 million. With growth, it would be higher. With a downturn, it would be less. The credit enhancement is bond agencies, and when they rate it and the interest rates that you get set, so when people want to buy, they like to see coverage that's about 1.5 times the annual debt service. So you typically either in that revenue stream or additional revenue streams will have a pledge of additional revenues that equal another 50%. That enhances the credit of the underlying bond.
So the 3.60%, I mean, what does that mean to the city, from the city, in practicality? Like what additional monies are we committing to per year with a percentage like that?
Well, the 3.6 is what the interest rate that we believe that we'll get on the bonds. So that it would have, this is what people would earn on average over a 20-year bond. If it's going into
Oh, sorry,
20,
I get it now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't read it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McKim?
Okay, well, I guess I'd like to follow up on essentially the same topic. I'm looking at the 12-month rolling numbers right now, and I agree. It seems like we're right at the very outer edge of plausibility for those numbers. So, as Mr. Volan mentioned, October is outsized and probably represents a catch-up on collections. So, and then also, of course, today we got the August numbers, which represent the collections from the month of July, and they were quite low. They haven't been split out to county versus city, but if we use 89% city, which has been pretty typical, then we wind up with 204,000 for this month. So if we eliminate the high and the low, the October and the August numbers, then we wind up with about 2.94 million as our 12-month average. So it seems like we'd almost certainly be having to use that credit enhancement if there was any kind of fluctuation at all, and probably we wouldn't want to go that high. So I'm curious what you think about that, about how much the numbers depend on that temporary spike in October.
Thank you. We're watching those numbers every month, and I'm glad to hear that you guys have the August numbers now. Yeah, again, that if you take the high and the low out, it's about $36,000 a year difference. So let's say that we're going to have a couple more months under our belt, and the October is probably going to be a very telling month as well. July is probably the off-peak time, I would guess. I'm trying to remember what it was last year. Well, it was a little bit higher. It was 200. June was the low month last year, but again, that spike in October may very well be the result of enforcement on those collections. So it'll be interesting to see, how this October, and we're continuing to update that rolling average, but if we go back to that last
So I
chart.
guess the real concern I have is that with these numbers, it doesn't give us much margin for error, especially when almost certainly we're going to want to be able to do some modernization even during the 20-year period of the bond. I mean, right now, out of the innkeeper's tax, we budget $100,000 a year for capital improvements. This would be, of course, adding to the properties that would need capital improvements. I wouldn't expect a brand new building to need a lot of building envelope improvements, but I certainly would expect tech modernization and other kinds of minor renovations that we would need and improvements we'd need over the years. So I'm just concerned that this doesn't leave us enough.
Those are excellent points.
That's fine. For now, thank you. We'll come back to Mr. Ruff.
No, right now. No question.
Okay. Ms. Hawk.
Yes, on the first scenario, the first line that says more conservative, it seems to me if we want to make certain we're not working our way into having to come back to the rest of the revenue, that first line would be more appropriate one to consider. Because then you're not looking at a one-on-one, you're looking at.
Yeah, we're at 100. That gives you 110%. It gives you a 10% margin.
Right.
And that may be a reason to look to the 25-year term if we still want to work with the $44 million budget, because if we stretch the bond payment, I'm just throwing that out, but we'll try to make it work whichever route you all think is best.
And this is not even looking at, well, we might see growth over the years. This is the dollar amount you're investing at the time the bonds are sold, which, if we're going to move forward with this, ought to hopefully not drag on forever. But then the interest rates could change, and that's jumping too.
Yep, that's always a risk. Yep.
Is that it? Is that for now, Ms. Hawk? Ms. Piedmont-Smith.
Well, I guess my basic question is, who would enter into these bonding agreements? I mean, if we're only talking about the city's share, is it just gonna be the city? Are we going to create some kind of city-county collaboration, since $7 million of the $44 million estimate is to renovate
Who would sell them?
a building that the county owns? And so, I mean, that's my, I'm just, I understand the financing and the figures given here, and I also tend to go conservative, but who is gonna do it? This is my big point of confusion. Anybody have
Seems like the attorneys may be able to give us an opinion on that.
I don't think it's an attorney's call. It's really your call collectively as to who's going to pay for it, and then we try to work a legal structure into that that'll accommodate what your decision is. I mean, it's a legitimate question. I think it's a question for everybody here to decide.
We have Ms. Rice here who might be able to speak to that briefly. Thank you.
I think that's an
And we'll come
excellent,
back to you.
it's an excellent question, and I think it needs to be addressed. One idea that's been thrown out is a capital improvement board that can be started. It's a neutral agency, much like the board that exists right now, the Building Corporation Board that has successfully operated this building and managed it for, since its inception. Certainly, if the city and the county wanted to, they can enter into an interlocal agreement. That would be a legal structure that we could do to provide for the collaboration between the city and the county. But it seems to me that at some point there has to be a contractual relationship between the two parties to make this work.
So am I correct to assume that the county owns the current building, or is it this special board that owns the building that we're
It's the
sitting
board
in?
at this point. When the lease gets paid off, it'll become county property.
Okay, so it's currently owned by a capital improvement board, but.
No, I think,
It's not a CIP,
guys-
it's not a CIP now, it's a building corporation. It's somewhat, I mean, the CIP is set up by a separate statute, that, we can certainly provide to you guys. We talked about it, with the county commissioners, but it's sensible. For instance, Vigo County, their food and beverage tax goes to a capital improvement board, and they operate the facility, manage money. So it's not, it's been used in other jurisdictions in Indiana, and it's worked.
Did you have anything else that you wanted to ask?
Well, I just think that's the crux of the matter is, because, the county, it's clear that the county eventually will own this building, and will the county, then, put forward the money for the renovation and connection, or will, the county enter an agreement with the city so that the city can do that, or, sorry. I don't have a further question, I just wanted to lay those
Sure.
questions on
No,
the table.
it's good. It's a good question. Ms. Munson?
Yes. First thing I want to say is I think we would all benefit from a detailed discussion about a capital improvement board and how that works. And now I have a question, and that goes back to the enhancements that are pledged from the city for this bonding, coming from TIF and CRED district funds. And I believe back on slide 3, you showed that TIF and CRED district funds are to be used for the parking garage for the convention center. And I'm concerned that TIF and CRED funds, I know you have other city projects that are funded from these sources, and I feel like I want to be comfortable knowing about this funding and how it's laid out, what its future is. So that's not a question to be answered right now, that's just what I want to know.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Sturbaum?
Jeff, do you want to comment on that? It's actually not CRED, I think it's LIT.
Is it lit? Okay, thanks.
City component of LIT.
Yeah, we're not, obviously, we're not selling a bond today.
Right.
So we have other options available to us for that credit enhancement. So we would be very detailed in what those backups would be. Again, that's just a pledge. You're not committing those funds. It's not like you're setting those funds into a different fund to use. It's there and available if necessary, if the primary funding mechanism
I know what a pledge
falls
is.
short. Well, other people in the
Okay.
audience may not, but yeah, so we're very aware of the detail that would be necessary to go around that, and that would be presented at a time when we were ready to talk about actually issuing the bonds.
Well, I think it would be helpful for all of us to hear about the funding plan for the parking garage, because that is a sizable component of this endeavor.
But, Mr. Sturbaum?
Yeah, a simple question about how these bonds work. they're clearly fixed for 20 years, right? And you're assuming on the income that we're currently having, they would make it. And I didn't hear you talk about inflation at all, but isn't inflation a relative constant? Doesn't it make the bond a lot less risky?
We would certainly hope so, because inflation would hopefully drive the food and beverage tax revenues upward. On the TIF aspect, we do have coverage on the city's TIF bonds that is a margin that we may not make that a direct pledge at the time we sell the bonds. Would probably be better with local income tax backup, but if we had to make up a $50,000 or $100,000 shortfall, it would likely, come from the TIF. But yeah, we would certainly hope that the inflation curve is going to drive the variable revenue upwards, and that our fixed debt will remain constant for the term of the bonds, whether it's 20 or 25.
And wouldn't the 25-year give you an ongoing balance to take care of unexpected needs over time instead of trying to hurry to that 20-year and then spend it? If you're comfortably under the need,
Yes.
you're going to have an excess annually.
Yeah, we could, yes, and I'll leave it to Jeff to comment on what they expect to do with the cumulative funds that would accrue there.
One of the things that we always play off on looking at the length of the bonds is the further you go out, the more interest you end up paying on the debt. So we offset that versus the ongoing needs that we might have from a capital replacement fund if we were going to do that on an ongoing basis. So we look at those. Originally when the bonds were sold, everybody went 30 years, but as time has come on, you've seen that was cut back to 25 and 20, and in a lot of cases you'll see 10 and 15-year bonds. So, and as well, the TIFs all have sunset dates on them now, so that would come into play as well.
So are you uncomfortable with a 25-year timeline?
That would be kind of the furthest we would want to go out. Again, if we're going to go 25 years, then the idea would be to have a funded capital replacement plan, because a building that gets used constantly is going to wear out faster. So 20 years is probably the outer edge. Some things will go 25, but that's what we play.
So you wouldn't spend the excesses, you would commit it to a capital?
No, I certainly think if we're going to go 25 years that we would want to fund a capital replacement.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Sims?
Thank you. Mr. Underwood, if revenues were higher than expected as we move along, and let's say we had a 25-year bond, would there be an option to pay that off early? Or is that not part of what we do?
Well, it depends on the structure of the bonds. Most bonds come with a callable feature after a certain year, and I'll let Bruce talk about 10 years, usually about 10 years. So we could theoretically call those bonds. Currently, advance refunding is not available to us. We're hopeful that Congress will change that again. It's a very useful tool, especially when interest rates drop. And that would be the other thing that we'd look at. If that was an option for us, interest rates drop, then looking at advance refunding for that. And then you can go shorter.
Okay, thank you. And some of the backup funding sources we've discussed already that's been offered has been TIF and LIT. Are there any other sources that haven't been brought up yet?
Others that would be available would be the CRED funds that we have. Those two funds have very short lives on them, so they're not a good pledge unless it's cash. And then your traditional property tax backup, but we would not use that method here.
Thank you.
You all set, Mr. Sims?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Mayor Hamilton, do you have comments or questions?
Yeah, thanks. I think, coming back to a couple of points, one, the $30 million figure was really a figure that we pulled out of some pretty old pro formas to be conservative and think about the estimate. And I think that what we now have is data, which is good. I think the point I'd also make is that this is, you know, this is a point in time, preliminary for discussion and analysis only, data set that I think these are all good questions about. We certainly hope and expect that over the years, with inflation, if nothing else, that the general trend on food and beverage will be up. As Chris, you mentioned, that this builds in a fixed $3 million a year assumption on each line just assumes a flat, no change for 20 years in the food and beverage revenue, right? That's not likely to happen, but looking at that is good. I think these are numbers that get us started. I think it also doesn't reflect cash reserves that will be in place when the bonds are issued, whenever that is, that will also be helpful. And I guess I look at these and I think from the range of 38 million to 58 million, and even if we take 38, the 30-year off to 53 million, we're in the range of what it's going to take to build a new expanded convention center. Now, there's some questions about, you know, rehabbing this facility. We haven't started to do the engineering to look at, well, if we needed to save 2 million here or add 2 million there, what do we do? But to me, this shows that the revenue, at least to date, and we have 18 months and we want to get more months, and that 12-month running average will keep moving around. Hopefully it'll start to see even longer trends, but I'm encouraged by this, that it's you know, it is more than the 30 million, and it's a good frame within which we can see the way to move the project forward. So I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment on those aspects of it and appreciate the analysis.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Jones?
I'd just like to address a little bit Ms. Piedmont Smith's concerns. And
Pardon me, are we in comments now? Should I be
No,
timing?
we're still
Okay, sorry, go
going
ahead.
around. Comments or questions?
Should I be timing?
Sure, yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry about that.
It's the county that passed, the county council passed the food and beverage tax that is allowing us to even have this discussion. And at the time that tax was passed, the county was certainly under the impression that their portion of the money that goes to the county would be available to the county for our own projects. And we actually already have projects identified. So it's up to the council, but I don't hear a lot of enthusiasm for putting our money into this.
Commissioner Giffens?
Yes. We had asked, and I think this has been raised a little bit, but we had asked for how we're gonna finance all 59 million. And so I'm only seeing a part of this tonight with the convention center and the upgrade here. And we had expected to have the parking garage part brought into this so that we know that we're not double dipping against TIFs and things like that, which TIFs specifically. So I'd like to see that. I'd also like to be assured from the city, we've heard it from consultants who don't have the authority to commit for the city, I don't think, but I'd like to hear whether or not the city is gonna actually commit 100% of your food and beverage tax to this project. And then for the consultants, I'd like to know, how the interest rate estimates were made. We've only gotten these things this afternoon, and so we didn't have time to go in and look at what current bond rates are and try to figure those things out for ourselves.
Can you answer that, address that question on interest? Thank you.
I'll take the interest rate question first. That's an easier one than, but these are based on probably about 20 to 25 basis points over what we're seeing in the market today, just to have a little cushion in the interest rate. Rates are really good right now. There's always a risk it's going to go up, but based on today's rates, we feel very comfortable with this, and there's a little bit of a cushion factored into that, probably 20 basis points or so.
I can answer. The city has committed and is committed to the 100% of the city's food and beverage tax. It's a project that was in the original MOU, and we continue to believe that. I think on the first question, Penny, on the parking garage, I mean, we've outlined where the city has that capacity to do so through TIF and other, and Jeff can add if we need to, but we're happy to share that. But that's, we're not asking or looking at food and beverage, innkeeper's tax, any other sources besides the city's revenue for that, so.
Yeah, there's one other thing. When we look at possible recession issues, IU has already said that they expect future class sizes to decrease, and we rely on students here, part of the generation, for that food and beverage tax. And so while we can talk about what inflation does, we also have to look at what will happen if our population decreases. And then I will tag on to something that Commissioner Gissens just mentioned, which is the 100% issue with food and beverage. We do have in our documentation a number of instances where it's mentioned that 7.5% of the city's portion of the food and beverage is intended to go to an ambassador program. So I just wanted to verify that to ensure that that's no longer on the table. Okay.
No, that was never identified that way, but it's 100% committed for that.
It was in the letter of intent.
Reserving that,
Yeah.
I think, as a possible, not for any particular program.
Okay,
but
I just want to make sure that that 7.5% is
100%.
not part of the 100. Okay.
And your 10% is, I think you all know this, but your 10% or 11 or whatever percent is not even
Right.
mentioned in this.
Right.
All that is the county is retaining to do what you wish with in that.
Right. Okay, great. So the next go-arounds, the first hand I saw was Ms. Hawk. Did you have another comment or question to make?
I did. And I haven't heard any discussion yet about the legislation, the official tax board that will be making these decisions before we can make the decision. We're required to go to them to ask for their recommendation. And so we have to understand that it will be what they allow us to do to begin with. But what I would like to see is each portion of the project broken down, where we anticipate the revenue to come from, and which bodies have to vote to make that all happen. Where does it have to vote on first, second, third, however many people have to be on board? Like if it has to come from the TIF, who all votes on that, having to do with the parking garage. Because we may be talking about this convention center, but many of us believe if we don't get that parking garage, we're not having a convention center. So that is an important part of the discussion. So that's what I had asked for. I thought we were going to get tonight. We sure don't have it.
Great, thank you. Okay, next on my list.
I mean, it may be helpful to respond if you want.
I stopped the clock.
Let's, okay, go ahead, sir.
Yes, so if TIF funds are used, the redevelopment commission and the city council would have to appropriate the funds. If it's lit and it's city share, that would be the city council. If it's CRED funds, it would be the EDC as well as the city commission and the city council.
Okay, so in each step of the way, do I understand you to say it's the city council in each step?
They are the appropriation body for the city, yes.
So there's not like some go around the city council, so they will have final say, but I assume they're going to want to make sure everybody's on board with this.
Yeah, state statute for-
They don't want to build a parking garage without a convention center.
State statute calls out that if a project is over $5 million or exceeds 3 years, it has to be approved by both the RDC and the city council.
Okay. I'll get you in a moment, Mr. Kim. Mr. Boland's next.
So I kind of want to go the opposite direction and ask the question, what are our expectations for the management of a parking garage? In other words, how much will it cost to park in a garage in an ideal scenario with that goes for a convention center? Can anyone answer that question? Like, are we letting people park for free to go to the convention? Or are they paying the market rate or somewhere in between? Are we subsidizing it? What is our expectation of the use of that garage?
Again, since that would be a joint appropriation by the city council and the RDC, it would be up to those two bodies to talk about the management and The council, parking commission as well has weighed in on those items as well. So certainly it would have to be a discussion with at least those two bodies.
Park Commission should weigh in, it hasn't yet, the question is too premature to have come to us, but, you know, I did some math. A $15 million garage at 4% on a 22-year bond, like the bonds we're doing for the other garages, would cost roughly $22.6 million. That's an annual payment of $1.025 million. For that kind of money, at $70 an hour to operate a bus at 10 miles an hour, which is the average of Bloomington Transit, we could run a shuttle between the Trades District, 2nd Street, the Square, the Sample Gates, and the Union 3 times an hour, or 6 times an hour, for at least 15 hours a day. Not that we want to necessarily spend the same amount of money if we're trying to save money, but have we really done anything to ask to control the cost of the garage? If we charge what the market will bear, the garage will pay for itself. So to what extent are we expecting to subsidize that garage in the name of the convention center?
We've not made any assumptions on that.
Okay. I mean, is there anyone here who is an expert in convention centers that can tell me what their expectation is?
Rob Hunden, Hunden Associates.
Awesome.
Hi, Rob Hunden, Hunden Partners. We've been part of the team assessing the situation here. So typically for a parking garage situation for convention goers, there is not typically a reduced price for those driving to a convention. And in fact, there's often special event fees that are higher. When large events come to town, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that to the extreme. But no, there's not typically a reduced rate. Now, sometimes if the headquarters hotel...
15 seconds left, so just briefly.
Yep.
Should we not expect that parking garage revenue would be added to the baseline scenario? Should we even be counting the $15 million in this if it's going to pay for itself?
I would say that's a public priorities discussion.
Thank you.
And the 15 is not in this.
Right.
The 15 is
Yeah,
not
so
in
why
there.
would it
No,
be
but what
here?
I'm- but the bonding capacity, then we're only looking for 45 million to pay for it, not 60.
Right.
Okay.
Ms. Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to this idea of using local income tax funds to pay for the garage bond. This is news to me, and I want to know if this is proposing an additional local income tax, or this comes out of our city currently budgeted local income tax, or what's the background?
Again, there's two pieces to this puzzle. What are the revenues that are sufficient to pay the bonds? This is all food and beverage. You then pledge additional revenues to enhance the credit, make them more marketable, lower interest rates. You usually will pledge up to 150% or so of revenue streams, and we're saying that if, in this scenario, if the food and beverage is not enough to get that 150% coverage, options available to us would be a pledge of local income tax, of TIF, of other revenue streams that we would have available to us to enhance the credit. The intent would be not to use those funds for the payment of the bonds. It's just there as a safety net.
We don't have enough money to pay for the garage with the food and beverage tax, so that's the bonding I'm talking about, the bonding for the garage. And I thought that's where you said that might be local income tax. Am I mistaken?
No, the local income tax that was mentioned was as a backup to the food and beverage bond,
Oh, okay.
completely separate from a TIF garage.
So the garage, the city administration currently proposes TIF for the garage or CRED?
Yes, with the caveat that revenue may be, this doesn't assume any revenue from the garage. It doesn't try to analyze how much TIF versus revenue, which is what Steve was asking about. That's to be looked at later, but the commitment that we believe the resources are there to do it, what the mix of TIF versus revenue would be is to be determined later with the council.
Did you have any follow-up questions, Ms. Piedmont Smith? Okay. I'll put you on the list. Mr. McKinn's next.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to talk about ownership again. So we have heard concerns that the city, for example, in this bond that would be proposed, would not be able to pay for enhancements to a property that's owned by the county, which would be renovations to the existing convention center. But in reality, I think we all want to conceptualize this as one project. It's not two separate convention center projects, it's one project. So I guess the question is, if ownership were transferred somehow to a capital improvements board, would that issue go away? With common ownership by a capital improvements board, it could be treated as one project. And then second, I guess, would the bond, if we decided to move forward on one of these scenarios, and the bond were issued initially by the city, could there be some kind of a transition to a capital improvements board, or would we have to sort out the capital and establish the capital improvements board and transfer all the ownership first before any bonding were to be done?
I'll start, and
Excellent.
county attorneys may want to weigh in on this. So first of all, as I mentioned, the city has to avoid a debt limit problem. And a capital improvement board doesn't solve that. In fact, the seminal case in Indiana that was done by the Supreme Court on constitutional debt under Indiana law was on the CIB in Marion County, where they determined when they first did the very first Hoosier Dome project that counted against the debt limit. And so that's why everything that the CIB does in Marion County is actually done through a lease financing through the Marion County Recreational Facilities Authority is the lessor entity. So the capital improvement board idea doesn't solve the lease issue, and so we'd have to figure out how to do that somehow. Just another comment I would make, just because I've worked with the capital improvement board in Marion County and in Allen County. In those counties, the state statutes actually dictate that these revenues go to the CIBs. So in Marion County, the CIB gets the food and beverage tax, gets the innkeeper's tax, gets cigarette tax, gets auto rental excise tax and all that. Here, the statutes don't provide for that. One of the reasons you don't see capital improvement boards in a lot of counties like yours is that there's just no statutory authority to fund them. And Allen County gets theirs and so forth. So you might actually be looking at a statutory amendment to make a CIB, I think, a practical avenue. But even with the CIB, I think we'd still have to look at leasing somehow.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Githens is next.
Yes, we talked a lot about the convention center and the parking garage, but we also have to worry about incentivizing a hotel.
About the what? I'm sorry?
We need to talk about incentivizing a hotel. So we need to talk about what that money is, how it's gonna be funded, who's responsible, things like that. And I thought that was part of a larger package too.
Right, that's going to be one of our bullet points, and who's going to do it?
Right. So does anybody have a response to how that is gonna work? How much it's gonna cost?
I could just add that I think having a parking garage right next to the hotel is a big incentive in and of itself, but that may be a.
Jeff, I don't know if you want to add, I know we in terms of hotel, I think the two major incentives that have been considered are land cost to a hotel and or abatement. I think it would be way preliminary and not particularly prudent to talk about a dollar amount before any negotiations were to begin with a hotel, but I think our expectation is that both of those things may be involved. I think it's right, the parking's there, and I don't know if, Rob, you want to add anything about that, but we don't want to put any particular dollar amount down on the table to let a hotelier start negotiating, say, well, you already committed 12 million, so let's start there and go up.
Correct. I can keep that short and sweet. And yeah, we don't know exactly what that number will be, but typically A long-term land lease for $1 a year is one of the ways to help buy down the cost. Tax increment financing off the incremental revenues generated by the hotel itself is often part of it, or existing TIF revenues that are excess in the TIF account. So those are typical, but obviously we'd have to work with the team to figure out the details once that all came to pass. One thing I'll also mention related to some of the other points is that the development of the convention center itself and the hotel will enhance food and beverage revenues and hotel tax revenues markedly from where they are today. So I don't think that's necessarily being taken into account, so that is something to consider.
The other item that we always look at as well is infrastructure improvements. So if you're adding a property to the tax rolls, water, sewer, fire protection, streets, sidewalks, connections. So you'll see cities a lot of times, that's their contribution to incentivize hoteliers as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your responses. Mr. Ruff?
Yeah, this question's for John, the mayor. So earlier, I think I heard you say, we're talking about financing, cash reserves will be helpful. I just want to make sure I understand what you meant. Is saleability of the bonds, credit rating, backup pledges, or what did you mean exactly when you said cash reserves would be helpful?
It just means that none of this reflects, if these bonds are sold a year from today or 2 years, a year and a half from today, we will have cash reserves in food and beverage tax account that is not reflected in any of this. It helps give cushion and cash flow and other things that will be not insignificant, I think.
Yeah, thanks.
But just that food and beverage, we're accumulating cash right now in the food and beverage tax that will help finance this. It's not reflected in any of that.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up to that, or?
No, that's
Okay.
what I want to know.
Thank you. Mr. Spoonmore first?
So what I've gathered is that there's funding in place through TIF and other means possibly for the parking garage. And there's bond capacity available for the project that is desired for the convention center expansion. And so that would mean then that a presentation would be prepared for the city council to make a final determination on this?
We have a lot of work to do
if they want
before
to
any-
utilize those mechanisms, and then when would that, what's the time frame for that happening?
Well, I don't know if, I mean, one way I think about this is phases. I mean, I think we're a long way from selling bonds, which would be when the detailed presentation will be, and Jeff, you can jump in and help me, but every fiscal body here and governmental body will have to make decisions all along the way about, are we gonna sell this piece of land? Are we gonna issue this bond? Are we going to approve this TIF use or other things? So there are gonna be multiple decision points along the way. I think what we wanted to do today, and I think it's helpful, is to get a sense of the framework of those resources, and we hadn't seen these numbers before on the F&B tax in particular. Does that answer your question, or I mean?
Do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, that answers it. It seems like that this, the funding mechanisms that have been identified for this to happen are gonna require the city council's ultimate approval. And I'm just kind of curious, what is the time frame for getting the approvals on the various aspects of the project? Because you parcel it out and you've got the parking garage, you've got the expansion, the renovation, and these different parts of that. And just, how do we prioritize which project is gonna happen first, which piece is gonna happen, and what the timeline is gonna be? It's just kind of what I'm thinking about right now.
And typically, once you get to that decision point, we look at about a 3 to 6 month time frame to move everything through the appropriate
Right.
approval process, including getting the rating agency to rate the bonds, get them prepared, and go to market.
And I think it's important to be swift, because we know we've been told and we understand the risk of waiting. I mean, every month that we wait on this, I think it was something like 350 square feet or something doesn't get added to the expansion. So I hope we're not going too many months and losing too much square footage.
I think the other point I'd make is, I think the next step and what needs to happen before the detailed analysis is actually to do the design, to actually dig into the building and to do the design and development work that will help us put together the detailed packages that will then need to go. It's also why I think having a steering committee that can help, as we've done before, help represent all of us at that table to move that process forward into the design that can bring that detail forward.
Mr. McKim's next.
So the 44 million that's been estimated for the project, the expansion and connecting to the existing center and the renovation of the existing center, does that include any kind of a management reserve or change order reserve fund or anything like that? Because I mean, we know that in a project of this size.
Short answer is yes, and now here's the expert.
Thank you.
Hi, David Greisel with Convergence Design. We're the lead architect for the convention center expansion. And yes, the numbers that we're throwing around tonight, the $44 million, are what we would call total project cost, which includes our design fee. It includes an allowance for furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, chairs and tables that would go into the building. And it includes a fairly robust contingency, which I don't remember that number right off the top of my head. I could look it up, but for things that happen, we all know that construction is a messy and uncertain process, and it's always prudent to include a contingency in your budget for unexpected things like you're digging a hole and you hit rock and stuff like that. So yes, that's in that 44.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Piedmont-Smith?
Yeah, I just wanted to, since we are talking about, what would be next steps, and that the city council would have to approve additional, the bonding, of course, from the food and beverage tax, but also additional funds that would be needed for a parking garage. I just wanted to put it on the table that I share the concerns of Councilmember Volan about how the garage will be funded, and I think that at least part of it, a good part of it, should be funded by revenues from the garage. So I don't know if that makes it more difficult to get a hotel owner to sign on, but I do need I think that needs to be a robust conversation about how much we want to subsidize parking with other resources that are limited, and that, we always have a lot of things we want to do with our TIF money and our CRED money, and this may not be serve the highest purpose for those funds. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I'm not, willing to just write a check for that parking garage. I think that we really need to reflect on our priorities there.
Great. Other comments or questions around the table? That's the end of my list. Councilor Hawk?
Yes, in response to your statement there, it would seem to me maybe the next step would be really for the city council to determine whether or not, how much they're going to put toward the parking garage, because you're not going to build a convention center without a parking garage, and that's your decision. And so should we figure that part out now? Or as soon as possible, so we know whether or not
Makes
we're
sense.
moving forward with this price, or where those dollars are going to come from?
Okay. Sounds like a good general plan. Okay, great. Mr. McKim?
And actually, it's related, and I agree with Councilor Hawk. I guess this is maybe a question to the consultants, but is a transportation demand management sort of process that Mr. Volan suggested, is that a feasible solution to parking, or based on your studies here, do we need a convention center garage, or else it's a no-go?
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely you need on-site parking for both convention and event guests as well as hotel guests. And in fact, the garage itself could be one of the tools you use to incentivize the hotel developer, as both will need parking. One of the key reasons you won't be selected to have a convention or to host conventions and events is lack of parking or the need to shuttle. One of the great things and the reason that Bloomington, we believe, is already successful as a destination and would grow in that success is because you're such a walkable, exciting downtown, but convention attendees typically will only walk about 3 to 4 blocks max, and that shortens as it gets darker or colder. So you really have to have parking within easy walking distance of either the hotel, the center, or both.
So it sounds like a really robust pro forma for the parking garage that would include potential revenues is going to be essential to moving forward.
I just wanted to piggyback on Rob's comment briefly. As part of our conceptual design process, we held a bunch of stakeholder meetings, met with over 200 stakeholders in this process. It was a very elaborate set of meetings that took place over many days, and one of the recurring themes that we heard more than anything else, the biggest recurring theme was the Monroe Center needs to be bigger. The other big recurring theme was parking. And we heard it from literally everybody we talked to, and I think, it's nice to speculate about, we could run a 24-hour shuttle or whatever, but people are going to expect to park here, and that's just the reality of the marketplace.
True story.
Okay, Mr. Vaughn's next.
First of all, my phone is dead, so I'm reliant on my watch. So it's also got this app on it, and it's a small ding, but anyway. So yeah, if we're in sort of question comment period, I have said about the 4th Street garage, I don't care how much structured parking we build, but make it pay for itself. So I'm not necessarily saying, even though I strongly believe that we have vast amounts of off-street parking that have never been fully utilized. I would, I'd be happy to talk to the details of parking policy to anybody who'd like to. But I'll point everybody to the 11th and Fee garage at IU. Not only do they charge more than the going rate downtown, they escalate every, however many hours, every hour, every half hour, every hour. They charge more per hour, okay, because the parking is in such demand. And we haven't yet done that in the city. We're still so sensitive to people who don't want to pay anything for parking that we may if we want to spend a catastrophic amount of money on this overall thing, we're going to subsidize the parking garage. Let's not subsidize it. Let's charge what the market will bear. And if it's true that parking can be had for a premium, if that pays for the garage, I don't have a problem with it. And the rest of the money goes to a better convention center. But we all have to take TDM seriously. We all have to be willing to ask what is the equilibrium price that will make this pay for itself, so that we don't have to worry about it here. We should be able to issue a revenue bond for a parking garage, and not a revenue bond from parking, not a revenue bond from the tax.
I should point, we do have a major TDM study going on right
Yeah.
now, by the way, for the whole city, which will help start all this.
But I think that's gonna need to be a part of the convention center study as well, because in a way, it seems to be boiling down to that. I think there's the city tax alone can pay for whatever improvements we want, but as long as we're conflicted about what parking should cost, and the answer is going to be, you need to charge what the market will bear and nothing less, then, this will always be a problem between everybody.
Mr. Spoonmore is next.
Is a revenue bond an option for this parking garage? Or would it result in some different interest rates and?
The bonds and how they're rated and the interest rates are always based on what is the surety of the revenues that back those. I can tell you, yes, there are parking garages that are revenue bonds, and every one of them has 1 or 2 backups to enhance the credit to it, because it's, parking is one of those finicky things that people can decide they want to park, they don't want to park. Certainly, if you look at successful garages that are around major areas, so you go to Indianapolis, and they price those events, as Commissioner Volan said. If you go to a Colts game, you're going to pay about 4 times what the normal rate is. So, and people pay it. Other people choose not to, and they'll ride the bus in, or they'll, get dropped off, or Uber, or whatever. But they certainly do demand pricing based on the event. That enhances the revenues. It's possible, but you will have to have one or two revenue backups in order to sell those bonds.
Well, I think that, you know, based on what I've heard here, is that it seems like most of us agree that parking is a very important component of this project, and to me, it's probably the most important component that needs to get figured out first. I've heard from a lot of my constituents in the Prospect Hill neighborhood that they're very concerned about the increased presence of on-street parking in their neighborhood, and just increased traffic rates. And so if there's not a parking facility for people to park in, people are concerned that that's going to impact their quality of life in the neighborhood there. So I think to me, this is a really, really important primary component that we should, try to figure out first before figuring out what the next steps are on the actual expansion even.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sturbaum's next.
Yeah, I would just say you don't really want to back up and slow down. I mean, there's a commitment to build parking garages, a necessity to build the parking garage. So to, to say that's a hurdle, we should all go into reverse and fix that and then move forward, may have a negative consequence on the progress of the project. But my question was, the Capital Improvement Board, their decisions ahead, and some of them involve the hotel, and there will be an advisory committee ongoing, as I understand it, or some people might want that to continue to happen. But at what point does the Capital Improvement Board become a decision-making body to work out the problems between city and county on some of these sticky decisions? I don't know what the timing of that is. I don't know how long it takes to create a CIB. But does it get a decision-making role in the development of this project?
It could, and it depends on when it's formed. But we could have Ms. Rice speak to that,
Yeah, and Bruce, I'd be interested in your comments as well. I think if there's a policy decision that needs to be made about what the best way to move forward is, and then legal, the legal issues can catch up with that policy decision. As Bruce said, the cities that have a CIB, their food and beverage tax goes directly to the CIB. That's not how our legislation is currently written. Legislation can be amended, but I think that
Is that county legislation?
That would be state, that's state law.
State.
State.
Okay.
I do think that a policy decision has to be made, and then the lawyers can sort of get behind and try to figure out how to make that happen. But you don't want the tail wagging the dog. So I do think that, the collective elected officials, which is why you're here, to have this kind of conversation about what's the best way to move forward. Again, having a neutral body that represents all entities has made sense for other organizations and keeps that progress moving forward. And that's not, there's value in that. But go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I think the threshold question is whether it makes sense to create a CIB, and then we'd have to figure out how to weave that in. As I mentioned earlier, there still have to be a leasing financing. The CIB statute actually provides that the county commissioners dictate who makes the size of the board and who makes the board appointments. So I think you'd have to all be comfortable that everybody was represented in the way you wanted them to be represented on that board, and then it could work as sort of a joint board, and it might be a tool, and it might not. I think again, you're right. We would just kind of have to see how this financing falls into place, and then we could decide, does it make sense for a CIB to be involved? Does it make sense for you to have a new building corporation that you all make appointments to? Could be another possibility if you want to do some kind of joint board, but there are different ways this could be done.
And just to clarify, you said the CIB is
You're on
appointed.
time.
Am I
Sorry,
on
can you
time?
be quick? You're on time.
I just wanted you to restate. The CIB
The
board.
the
by
CIB statute actually provides that the county commissioners dictate the number of board members and who makes the board appointments. So,
And it has to be bipartisan.
Yeah, that's right. There have to be different political parties represented and so
I
forth.
think state law says there are 7 members, if I'm correct, and the county executive determines which units get to appoint to that. And there have to be, there can be no more than 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think that's right. 3 of each
one party.
political party. I think that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Munson was next on the list.
Yes, I was interested in the capital improvement board question too, and learning more about this. And I would ask our financial consultants to tell us the difference between what a CIB can do and what a building corporation can do.
I don't really
With
think.
respect to the convention.
I don't think there is really much difference. A capital improvement board has broad authority to do basically capital improvements, as the name would suggest. I think a building corporation, it's set up under the nonprofit Indiana law, and so in its articles of incorporation, you would give it the power to do public improvements, including a convention center, and lay out in those articles of incorporation who has the authority to appoint board members and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Volin.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of expand the problem here, because let's assume that the convention center is as successful as we all hope it will be, and parking is in great demand, and it's higher priced than we're accustomed to. That's going to affect the 4th Street parking garage, which is less than 2 blocks away from wherever we build it. If people see that they can park for whatever the price we're used to, instead of the price that the convention would charge, then suddenly there's going to be demand on the 4th Street garage. And if we don't raise rates appropriately, and that means street parking has to be higher than garage parking because it's more convenient, then you're going to have a problem on the street. So the price that's set in the convention center garage is going to affect city parking policy. And it would, if that entity is part of a CIB, the city won't have control over that if the garage is being priced at the rate that it should be. So this is an emergent problem that we need to think about, and I'd love to hear some comment on it, but you know, like, I think everyone needs to brace for higher parking prices throughout downtown just to manage the demand, which is what pricing parking is supposed to do.
Mr. McKim's next on the list.
Actually, Bruce answered the question that I was
Okay.
going to ask. So.
Okay. I have 2 quick points to make relating to the parking garage and the CIB. First is, if you look at slide number 25 of the May 23rd, 2019 Steering Committee PowerPoint that's on the Dropbox, which was sent out to everybody here, just take a note of the projected attendance rates at the 30,000 square foot exhibition hall. And we're looking from year 1 from 134,600 people to 204,800 people by year 10. So I don't know how that breaks down to daily parking demand, but it's worth thinking about whether if these attendance rates are accurate. I assume part of these folks would be staying at the hotel, so I would count that in there, but it's something to look at when you're looking at parking and how large the garage is. The second point I want to make is that the county commissioners have committed whatever land we own around here, plus the current center, to the project. Third, the county council has requested a information session on capital improvement boards. Our legal staff will be presenting that at a special session, and we will let all of you know about it so that you all can attend as well and ask any questions you have. But because they're looking into that legislation, digging down into a lot of these very same questions that have been raised here, because the council raised this question to us. So that's in the works, and it should be in the next few weeks, yes?
We don't have a date set, but yeah, we're gonna work with the council and then
Okay,
schedule.
so in a few weeks, you'll be seeing a notice for that. It'll probably be on a Monday night, okay? Just so-
On Monday
yeah.
night, everybody teaches on Monday
every-
night.
Mr. McKim?
And actually, I just wanted to add, could we add to the scope of that meeting a potential building corporation? I think we
Yes,
ought to look at
absolutely.
not fixate on
Sure.
one option, but yeah,
Right.
let's look at the
Right,
multiple
that's-
options for
Good.
co-ownership.
Good. Ms. Hawk?
Right, and we so far, and I think later we're gonna have more discussion about the innkeeper's tax, but we have to recognize that while the county council put in place this food and beverage tax to be used for the convention center and other projects, we also put in place many years ago the innkeeper's tax, and raised it then from 3% to 5% for the expenses of the convention center. And remember, I saw in a recent projected MOU that somehow or the other, when this was to be paid down, that dollars would be coming from innkeeper's tax. Well, the tax advisory commission set up by the state has zero control over the innkeeper's tax. That innkeeper's tax was put in place by the county, and by legislation, the county council votes on their entire budget. So, I mean, that's the reason why I think it's important that we set down every bit of revenue, and then where those dollars are gonna go, and who
votes on
has
them.
the authority to vote on it.
Yeah.
Good suggestion. Okay, can we, we're at 90 minutes, so can we move on to the next portion? Is everybody comfortable enough to move on to the next portion? It seems like we have some good things to work out, including an informational meeting, some parking questions for the city to consider. Ms. Munson, if I could turn it over to you to talk about the operational financing side, I would appreciate it.
I didn't prepare anything to relay today because I sent you all an email listing operational costs. These were provided by Talisha Kappa, and that was very helpful. And I married these with the pro forma 10-year forecast for operational expenses. And I don't even have this up on my screen, so that's not very helpful here. Here it comes. I think we can see that the innkeeper's tax is fully committed to operating the convention center, handling bond payments, and funding our marketing, which is the marketing of tourism in Bloomington and Monroe County. That's Visit Bloomington.
Here.
And we don't really have any cushion here. Now, admittedly, innkeeper's tax will rise, but also there will be, expenses will go up too, both for marketing and for operations. So I just laid out the numbers for you all to see.
All right, great. Did you have anything to add to that, Ms. Kopik?
That'd be great.
No, thank you.
Okay.
We're the Convention Center Management Company. Innkeepers has been crucial to operation,
Right.
promotion, recruiting, events, maintenance, so.
Okay, great, thank you. And please stand by, because there may be questions for you. We can do a round robin again, or we could just go by show of hands. Anybody have a preference? Let's go around the room first. Let's just do it that way. We did it last time. I'm gonna go reverse order. Mayor Hamilton?
I guess if anything, I'd ask Rob if he wants to add, but I'll hold off on that to add some of the pro forma analysis that we've got.
Have your face, so I can.
He can follow up probably on some other things.
Okay, all right,
Go ahead.
all right. Mr. Sims, do you have any comments or questions?
Actually, I was wondering if someone could clear this up. I understand the $44 million total project, but that does include $7 million renovation. And how did we get to the point that that's something that the city,
Right.
with those revenues, is going to take care of? And
Right.
Does that
Right.
have anything to do with the county?
Yeah, so you're kind of going back to the earlier phase, but it's a great question. And that's why when we talk about a CIB, it becomes very important, because if there is a CIB created, the necessary land from the commission, from what's owned by the commissioners or the current board, building corp, and the current convention center would be put in as assets to that CIB. That's just how we envision it. Obviously, we're at very early stages in talking about it. So, so then it would all become the property of, right, the CIB owns and operates and manages. And and the question that Mr. Sturbaum raised is, at what point does that happen? When do the decisions get shifted? And that's something that clearly we're too early on to manage, but that's a good question.
Well, thank you for that.
Yep.
And I touch base on, as far as the CIB, and that makes sense. I mean, I'm not for or against, we'll just listening.
Yeah.
But if I have 10 people on this board, and I know 7 was the number, but it's one of those bodies that's actually putting all the funds in, then why would you have a
Right, that's it.
CIP?
It's a
with
good
the other
question.
6
They have the
people
land.
She just answered that, Steve.
Okay.
It's a comment.
Yeah.
I'm
It's a
done.
good question.
I'm
No,
done.
it's a
I'm done.
great
Thank
question,
you.
really, yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. Okay.
Let the finish the comment.
Mr. Sherman, do you have a question about operations? We can, or we can go backwards if anybody wants to, but do you?
No.
No? Okay. Ms. Piedmont Smith?
So obviously the operation expenses are going to increase as we see in this pro forma. I have absolutely no sense as to whether the innkeeper's tax receipts will increase proportionally. It seems to me they probably won't cover the increased cost of running the convention center. So what do we do in that case? What's the other source of funding to actually manage and run the convention center?
It's a good question. Anybody want to speak to that?
No, you go.
Okay, I think innkeeper's tax will rise with a new hotel and with additional lodging built in this city. But I don't have the financial background to make any forecasts at all. So I would turn to our consultants.
Microphone? Got the mic.
So, and Dylan is looking up the specific projections of fiscal impact for the various revenue streams. But big picture, for a stabilized year, we projected an addition of 35,000 hotel room nights to the community, net new. And that's not just in one hotel, it's in multiple hotels. So obviously, when that flows through, then that creates significant uplift in the hotel tax collections. So, do you have that number?
It's 100 room nights a year.
Drum roll, please.
Per year.
Mm.
Per year.
100 nights a day.
That's,
It's about 100 nights a day.
Okay, so that's over 30 years. So, so you probably don't want the 30-year number.
No.
no.
1
20.
second. Let's get the, obviously, it's going to change over time. So let me get to that table. So county hotel tax by year 5 is expected to be nearly $500,000 ahead of where it is today. Food and beverage tax up 50,000, COIT up 150,000, and then of course property tax from the hotel.
With that gone, that was timing.
There's 30 seconds left in her question.
Yes.
In her
Did
question.
you have anything else? Yeah, okay. Ms. Hawk, you're next. Do you have any questions or comments? Mr. Ruff, questions or comments? Mr. McKim?
I guess, first of all, to continue responding to Ms. Piedmont Smith's question, I think our understanding is that the revenues from the convention center itself plus the innkeeper's tax are going to be what's going to support the operations. I don't think anyone has any interest in putting any other, clearly there's no excess capacity in food and beverage to support operations. I don't think anybody has any interest in general fund or income or property tax revenues for that. So those two revenue sources are the operational funds available for the project. I guess the other two things I'd mention is that one of the reasons I was concerned before about maintenance and upgrades on the convention center and the new expanded convention center is that we currently have approximately $100,000 budgeted per year out of income tax for capital improvements, and that's obviously not going to be. I mean, it's not even big enough to do
Innkeeper's,
major.
not income.
I'm sorry, innkeeper's tax.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's obviously not even enough to do the major improvements that might be needed here, much less the new facility. So I think that's one reason why I'm very intrigued by the idea of a 25-year bond that would then incorporate extra capital improvement reserve in that. And then finally, just remind everybody that there is a debt on the existing property. Right now, that debt is a $636,000 lease payment per year that goes to 2026 when there's only half a year's payment. So it'll drop off in 2026. And most of that comes from the innkeeper's tax, but there is a small portion that comes from rentals on other properties in that are owned by the Convention Center Building Corporation. So, for example, in 2018, out of that $636,000 lease payment, $498,000 came from innkeeper's tax, and the rest came from just from rentals. But clearly, as we start to develop properties for the convention center, those rentals are going to go down. You know, they probably won't because some of those are at the southern end. They might not go down, you know, but within the time frame of the bond. But they certainly are going to go down as that property is. So we can count on up to $636,000 still needing to be redirected for payment of the debt service that'll then drop off, like I said, in mid 2026.
Okay. Mr. Vaughn?
Yeah, just another thought on the potential new garage. I argued for repair of the 4th Street garage last December and in March because of the possibility that we ought to have built a convention center garage by the time the repairs were done and the garage couldn't last anymore. We could have bought time to build a convention center garage. But after hearing this conversation, if there's one thing that I'm sensitive to, it's I do not want to see the 4th Street or the new convention center garage built and open anytime before the convention center itself is built. I want to see them concurrently done. That may prove a challenge construction-wise. I don't know, like how often such centers and their garages get built concurrently, but like I'd be really sensitive to, I want to know more about exactly what will be the use case for the convention center garage. To what extent will non-convention center attendees be using it? What is our expectation there? And, again, the pricing is a huge deal. It's going to affect all the parking operations of the city. It's the kind of thing that's kind of outside the scope of what we expected. I didn't see that before this meeting, but now I'm really sensitive to it. So, where it's going to go is another matter too. Like we haven't decided yet where the main building will go, where the hotel will go. Will it be an extra block away? How much more difference is that going to make? Should it be an extra block away, or should it be right next to the 4th Street garage? These are all things I just don't have answers for now. And so to that end, I want to say that just sort of in passing that I think this has been a good meeting, that we definitely need to have more meetings like this. A whole bunch of unexpected things have come out of it, and I hope we'll keep doing it. Thank you.
Mr. Rallo, do you have any comments or questions on anything?
Yeah, I have got a follow-up on Isabel's question, I think, and Jeff's statement. Well, first of all, can I just get a clarification from the consultants that the current innkeeper's tax revenues are going to cover the maintenance and operations of the new facility? Is that can you concur with that? Because that was declared by somebody.
It was never declared by us. Those are two separate things.
Okay.
And obviously, you want to make sure that you're managing the center as efficiently as possible, and our projections suggest a less than $500,000 loss on an annual basis to the convention center after stabilization, which is about 3, 4, 5 years. The first couple of years will be greater than that potentially. So yes, there would be a gap there between the net new hotel revenues, but they're not directly correlated, obviously. So I would just say that for the first 3 to 5 years, the answer would be no, and after that, I would expect the answer to be yes.
I see. Okay. And then following up on Jeff's statement, so the current bond is being serviced by the innkeeper's tax till 2026. Is that my understanding of what Jeff
To April.
said? So that revenue could be applied to the bond for expansion after 2026 potentially?
Operations?
Then you.
Or operate.
Or operations?
Yeah.
I mean, all that, yeah, that could be applied to operations. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would think that would definitely be, I mean, it would be part of the innkeeper's tax that would be available to support enhanced operation,
Okay.
increased operations.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Did you have any follow-up questions? So,
No.
okay. So it sounds like something the county council can talk about as well in terms of what you plan to pledge and what you hope to achieve. We'll go to Mr. Spoonmore next.
So a question about future income streams for the innkeeper's revenue. So as we see more and more people starting to utilize short-term rentals and Airbnb and those types of options, are there potential negative impacts to future innkeeper revenue as a result of that? Does anybody know?
I would like to suggest that Mike Mathesy address this, if he's here.
He is.
Good.
There he is.
July 1, they started collecting innkeeper's tax from all short-term rentals, including Airbnb, VRBO, and all of that. So the county should be receiving those revenues sometime soon, so it's only going to increase.
Wow.
They're receiving. Right. Good. Other questions? I'll come back to you. I'll put you on the list. Ms. Granger?
I have no question about this section.
Okay. Commissioner Gittens?
I wanted to address something that Councilor Bowles said, that I've actually gone and talked to like people at Wonderland, and they would love to see a parking garage that would abut the B line so that people could go directly from the parking garage down to Wonderland. They would love to see parents and grandparents bring their kids to that kind of facility, and so I think we can start to talk about how it enhances other parts of the city as well.
Right. Commissioner, Councilwoman Hawk, do you have?
Oh, I was just going to be facetious and say if we want the innkeeper's tax to go up, we better hope for IU Sports to do well.
I'll think about banking on that.
Not after,
Most
Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah,
more games than
did we have any intention of having the architects do any presentation of what they had done to this date?
Yeah, not tonight, because we really wanted to get through the financials, and we're already at almost 2 hours right now. So, so the answer is probably not, because we do have one more section to deal with. But I would think it's worth talking about. Does anybody have other questions? And then I'll.
I was just gonna say, I think it would be, if they have anything prepared, I think a very brief presentation of that would help people be on the same page.
It's not on our agenda, and I really want to make sure we get through our structure next, and then we're going to be running into your council meeting, and I don't want to do that either. So, respectfully, let's see if we have time. How about that? Is that fair? Okay. Mr. Ruff?
Quick question for Mr. McKim. That $2/3 of $1 million release payment, pre-innkeeper's tax, where did that come from?
That's come from the innkeeper's tax.
It was
always
paid.
Maybe one of our.
This is a
very
recent
early.
renovation. Yeah, this
Okay.
one, yeah.
Yeah.
When was this renovation done that,
2012.
yeah.
2012?
This is a 2012 renovation that we're paying off, yeah. Good question though. Others? Okay, so it looks like we have about 13 minutes to talk, which is close, we're close, to talk about, or as close to that as possible, to talk about the structure of future meetings. And it sounds like everybody has a lot to think about and to talk about with their respective groups before we move forward. But we'd like to see what folks would like to suggest. Mayor Hamilton has a suggestion, and we'll start there. And if we can keep our suggestions short, we'll get through this.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's time, and I also I have my back here, but none of this would happen without so many of you in the room. I thank you for the leadership you've helped move this project forward. And I may be able to squeeze a little time in for our architects too. Let me just, I think there are several different ways to go forward in terms of talking about future meetings. One is to create a CIB, Capital Improvement Board. The county and the city have been talking about this for quite some time. I think it is a good idea to pursue. I think it's complicated, but I think it's got real potential, whether it's exactly a board or a building corporation. I think from my perspective, it would be very helpful to do that in parallel as we're also moving this project forward, because I do think it is, we shouldn't underestimate how complicated it might be to do that kind of governance, but I think it's definitely something we ought to look at in parallel as we move forward. There's been a proposal to create this group of 20 elected officials as a kind of a new steering committee, a governing body for the process. I think my perspective that I would suggest is that the previous steering committee, which was 9 people, 1 each from our respective public bodies and 5 from the public generally, was a very effective way forward, and the one that we would urge. And I just want to take a step back and remind us that we have been doing very good things. We are really in good place. I kind of think about this in phases. Phase 1, 2016 and 2017, we had a big community conversation. Should we expand a convention center? Do we think that's a good idea, or should we stay with what we have? We had a lot of public discussion. We had a lot of small group and large group discussions, and that phase 1 ended with the county council adopting the food and beverage tax, endorsing after some county-led process to look at options to say, yes, let's put a food and beverage tax in place to create a new convention center, an expanded convention center. Phase 2, we're kind of at the end of it now, from my perspective, which has been the phase to think about what's the scope of this project, trying to put some details on it. Where should it be? Some site reviews of options for that, deep public engagement, thinking about size, site plan, who are our partners, what architects should we have, kind of the basic outline of the project. And I think that's where we are, and I may ask for David just to give us a very brief summary of that process as we go. And then I think we're ready for phase 3, which is design and build. We haven't designed it. We have many, many questions still to go in the design, both of the garage and exactly where it's sited. We have a basic site plan. We have many questions about the exact design of the convention center and its connections and hotel choice and options to make as well. And I think that we should remember that once we start phase 3, design and build, it's probably a 3-year process to get to an opening. So that's kind of the phase I feel like we're ready for, and we have a lot of time in that process to make a lot of decisions that these bodies would do. And then phase 4 is operations, and we're already talking about that too, operations, which is good. I believe that the steering committee over the last 14 months has done a really good job. Some of you have been on it to help represent us and move this process forward, and I think that is a great entity to keep it moving, with each body here having the time to have votes on transfer of land, issuance of bonds, all those steps have to be done by the formal bodies, recommended from us other. But I might ask, just take 3 or 4 minutes, if you could, David, to run through that site plan process that we've done. If I can take my.
Let's not do that right now. I'd really like to talk about structure first before we go through and talk about the site plan and all that. It's really beyond the scope of what's on our agenda right now, so please hold up if you don't mind.
I guess I was asking that you reserved a little time for the city presentation on structure, and I think the structure, I was hoping, do people not want to hear the outline of the site plan and be able to ask questions about that?
Well, this was the structure of the meeting, was the agenda plan, so that's why we're focused on getting, let's get past this first, okay?
Structure of
Let's
future
get-
meetings. Yeah, I thought we were talking about
Structure of
governance,
future
structure
meetings.
of future-
Structure
yeah.
of future meetings,
Structure of
right.
future
So
meeting.
let's talk about.
Please
so-
save a little time at the end. It's a
Sure.
benefit to the public as
Sure,
well.
that's fine, but I don't want to break from our agenda, okay? So you recommend a steering committee to begin with, okay. Other suggestions? Yes.
One of it's a suggestion, I just feel like maybe there's a phase 2.5 that the executives of both city and county have been discussing this for a long time, and this is the first night where the councils have really had to face it, and we're the ones who are gonna have to make the initial vote to say create a CIB. So I feel like we're not at, if we're at the end of phase 2, there's some kind of interim between phase 3 because we have to I mean, tonight showed me that we have some governance questions to answer, and until both bodies are satisfied with it, I don't want to
I
be
like
too premature. I mean, I'm excited about this too. I've been supportive of the convention center for years, but I mean, I think about parking a lot, and I didn't think about the parking that we thought about tonight. So while I don't want to diminish anyone's optimism, I feel like there are some hard decisions that the two councils have to make that we're not prepared to make. We won't be prepared to make at the next meeting.
Right.
It'll take some
Right.
time to work out.
Of course. One of the things that the three of us thought about was we thought it might be a really great next step. And yes, first of all, thank you to everyone who served on the steering committee that went through the May time period. They provided such incredible guidance and useful input on design and location and everything else. But to me, this seems like these are questions for mainly council first of all, and so I don't know that a steering committee should be our first step, although maybe down the road. So I'm hearing that, and I appreciate the input. So we were going to suggest, and we're throwing you all the last minute curveball, we're going to suggest that the two councils lead the next meeting of elected officials. You all put together the agenda. And if you want to get into talking about site planning, development, et cetera, that's great. We put out a longer agenda first, which included all the points that we thought needed some discussion. And I imagine that if you opened it up for input from everyone here, you're going to get quite a list. But I would appreciate it if the two councils would be so kind as to run the next meeting. I think we need another one, and you all
Like
will know
this.
when you're ready.
At least one more.
We're not going to know, right? So,
I think it's a really terrific suggestion.
are you up for it? The challenge.
I haven't consulted my colleagues, but I think it has a lot of merit. And it sounds like we will need to do that.
Yeah,
And so I'm up for that.
that would be great.
Yes.
We really appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay. Other comments on future meeting structure? And I would then suggest that if you have agenda items, to suggest that you send it to either one of the council presidents. Shelley Yoder is the county council president, but she teaches on Monday nights, so she's not here. But I would assume that Eric would be willing to take emails as well. Shelley would get home and get all this, why are you sending me agenda items? Right? I'm just getting home. Poor thing. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, I believe it's an excellent idea for the two councils to meet, and so that we can see where we are, and if we're all on the same page, or where we might need to make adjustments. And hopefully, we can do it on a night that our council president, Shelley Yoder, and Kate Wiltz and Trent Decker can be here, because this particular night just doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
But I think we could really, they can have all the steering committees in the world, but if these two groups don't agree to the financing, it's not going to take place. So I think we could work well together and see where we are on it.
May I ask a question?
Please.
Just for clarification. So my understanding from the proposition is that we will lead the meeting,
Yep.
but the executives will
You
share
can-
in the
you-
meeting as well.
You may invite us or you may not, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll be here anyway.
Yep.
Because, we show up for all the good meetings. But you may not need our participation, or you may decide you want it. So it's entirely up to you.
Oh, we can ask the
Well-
presentations.
Yeah, we had Mr. Sherman first.
Yeah, I get that we're talking about funding.
Yeah.
What I don't suggest is that we just dismiss what the committee has done, dismiss this year and a half's of work,
Nobody's doing
think let's all discuss where it should go instead of where we think it might go. Let's move all these puzzle pieces around and start all over. That would be a huge mistake, in my opinion. And what I was hoping out of this meeting too was that we could see a product of what happened. We brought the architect here. people could see that there's been some progress. You could agree or disagree with what gets put out there, but it would just be kind of beneficial that we all are on the same page. And I think this has been hugely beneficial, and I'm very reassured about the kind of funding possibilities we have here. It isn't mission impossible, and the community really wants this to happen. And we have a way to make this happen, and we all want to work together on this. I mean, we shouldn't be combating each other
Right.
about this project.
Absolutely.
And there really was some good input and a lot of time spent on getting to a certain point. And I think it would just be, words are one thing, pictures are another. If we could end this just on seeing
Right.
where we've gotten
Let's-
to.
Let's see
very
what other
much
comments
like
we have
that.
first, and then we'll do this at the end. And then I'm stepping on your council's toes at that point, so, you know, that's on you, not on me. Did you have a comment, Mr. McKinney,
Yeah,
next, and then I'll come back?
So I guess I'm definitely supportive of having the councils lead a meeting to focus on fiscal issues, and we'll clearly have to identify the agenda quickly so that we can get the required supporting information. I mean, I'm sure a pro forma for the garage is going to be an essential input to having that discussion. So that's great for focusing on fiscal issues, but then what are the commissioners' thoughts about continuing work on the kind of design and physical layout, which really isn't so much a fiscal issue?
Well, I will tell you that one of the things we recognize is that the convention center project is both a legislative and executive function, which brings in the city council, the mayor, and the commissioners. But we also recognize that even with that, if there's an issue with funding and we have to relocate something or resize something, we also want the fiscal bodies here, which is why this initial meeting was something that we proposed, because it brings together all of these parts. And so I would like us to have a meeting to talk about, once we are clear on finances, because we might not have the money we think we might have, or we might have more, or whatever, which never happens. But I could dream. But once we have that, we can sit down together, because we all have an interest in this, and we all care about this community, and we all care about this project a great deal. Take what the steering committee has given us, take what the consultants have given us, and then work together and, you know, decide on what we want this to look like. And there's going to have to be moments where some of us will have to disagree on some things, but commit to the project. Disagree, commit, we're not gonna get our way, and that's all right. But we still wanna be committed to the project, but having a tabletop conversation, I think, is a good way to reach consensus. It's not necessarily going to be something where everybody's just going to run in the room and say, this is exactly what we want. People are going to have great ideas, and we should hear all of them, because as you're talking about parking, I'm thinking, I didn't even think about where that parking garage is located, so thank you. I think having this conversations have been so enlightening for all of us, so that's my answer to that, long answer to that. Is that fair? Okay. Who else is next? Mr. Sims, did you have a question?
I think Mr. Bowman pointed to me so he could speak more.
I was waiting with bated breath to hear your comments, Mr. Sims, and nothing else.
My only comment is that our president has committed to working out an agenda so we can all get together.
Yes.
And that's where I am now. Everything else that we talk about after that really don't do a
It
lot.
really is fine.
Yeah.
So
You're-
let's
you're
listen
right.
to our president, let's see if we can get together, us two council
You're right.
fiscal bodies, then we can move forward.
Sounds
Everything
good.
else at this point tonight is kind of, you know,
Yeah.
we
Thanks
got,
for.
we got another major meeting after
Yes,
this one.
and
so
thank you for
let's-
grounding
let's
us.
rock and roll.
Thank you for grounding us. I
Oh, no,
appreciate it.
no, it's
I
fine.
appreciate it. That's
It's
helpful.
fine.
Ms. Munson?
I'm just gonna, I had a question, but I'm gonna second what Mr. Sims said. Let's just give our recommendations to our council presidents and set the agenda and prepare to move forward. I'm excited about this.
That sounds like a great plan. All right, with that, again, I do want to thank everyone for coming and staying. I noticed there's a few more empty chairs, but for all of you who stayed, thank you. We appreciate you all being here, and we're gonna turn it over to the architects at this point, because we're going to be stepping on the city council's toes, and I don't wanna do
Yeah.
that. So I wanted to conclude our meeting officially, but for those who wish to stay, there's going to be a presentation of the architects.
I would just say thank you. I hope you all will listen to the architect
Absolutely.
part of this meeting briefly. And I do think thinking about in terms of designing this, the next steps of designing and building, we need to think about what a 20-person body of elected officials is as compared to a smaller body that brings public expertise in that we found very useful over the steering committee process. They're very different, different processes. But let's go with David.
Just one last thing before he starts. We scheduled our meeting to follow this, not to start before 7, not to start after 8. We do have time
Great.
to hear this.
Great,
So
perfect.
if we can take 15
That's what I
minutes,
was
that would
hoping
be
for,
ideal.
that we would do that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to conclude our meeting so that
Thank you.
that you all have your leeway.
Thank you. Again, David Greisel with Convergence Design, and we're associated with Schmidt Associates of Indianapolis on this project. I'm going to give you the super condensed version of what we went over on May 23rd, because I know that not everybody who is here tonight was at the May 23rd meeting. So for those of you who were, I apologize, but this will be the really smashed down version of that. We engaged a process to conceptualize and sort of scope out what this convention center expansion might possibly be, because at the time we were originally hired, nobody really had a good, solid idea of what the convention center expansion was. And so we've attempted to give a little bit of solidity to that, and in doing so, working with the steering committee very closely, as well as with, as I mentioned before, a very large group of stakeholders, the largest group of stakeholders I have ever interacted with as a design professional was right here in Bloomington on this project. So way to go, Bloomington. You've set the record, and may never be equaled. But it was a very, very interactive process, and I think because of that, I feel good about the result that we got to. That it wasn't just something we cooked up over cocktails. It was something that was very thoroughly vetted by a lot of people. One of those activities was a design charrette where we were here on site for 3 days and came up with a whole bunch of ideas for how you would possibly expand the Monroe Convention Center, of which you see 7 site plans illustrated here that represent the 4 compass points, expanding north, south, east, and west, as well as 3 additional ideas on top of that. And so rather than walk you through each one of those individually, which would probably take longer than you're going to have patience for, I'm going to cut to the chase, which is that in a very interactive process with a lot of stakeholder input and very good interaction with the steering committee, we landed on a recommendation that I want to get to the right one. Here we go. So this is the recommendation that came from the steering committee with, of course, our input as design professionals, and Rob's input, I should mention, as our convention center market demand consultant, that we expand the Monroe Convention Center to the north, as you see in the site diagram on the left, and the kind of 3D sort of box puzzle on the right, and that the new hotel, which is proposed to go along with this project, be located immediately to the east of the current center, directly across College Street, with a parking resource, which has been a topic of considerable discussion tonight, located behind the Courtyard Hotel, directly south of the current building. So new expansion, existing Monroe Center renovated, substantially renovated, to orient it towards the new center, so that these 2 pre-function areas are actually facing each other across 3rd Street and would be connected by a pedestrian bridge that would also go across 3rd Street. In this conception, the pedestrian bridge actually ties the 2 convention center pieces and the hotel together in a single circular bridge. You know, whether that actually ends up that way is anybody's guess, but that was the idea that came out of the charrette. So we're dealing with the big components, the new piece of approximately 30,000 square feet of new combined ballroom and exhibit space that would give Bloomington that really big room that it needs to accommodate the events that Rob's analysis identified. Again, renovating the current facility to add meeting space into that mix, and then connecting all of it to the B-line by means of a new pedestrian plaza here and a new pedestrian plaza here on the west side of the building that would also serve as future expansion space with the opportunity to have a rooftop deck on top of this blue back-of-house service area that would actually look down onto the B-line and create a new outdoor environment. So a lot of fun things going on in this diagram. And again, this was something that was developed out of a very elaborate stakeholder involvement process that got a lot of input from a lot of people who are here tonight, like Talisha, as well as a lot of public members. These ideas were actually vetted in a public forum, as well as being vetted with people who were directly involved as stakeholders. So it was a really thorough and elaborate process that led to this recommendation, which is the basis of the budgetary numbers that you saw earlier this evening. So what we're talking about is this plus this is the $44 million total project cost. That, which you're only seeing a part of, is the $15 million parking structure resource of approximately 550 cars. And all the connecting bridges is included in that overall project budget. So there's a pretty good correspondence between what you're seeing on this slide and what you were talking about in your financing discussion. There should be a pretty close correlation there. So I'm gonna stop right there and see what questions you have that we might be able to answer.
Did you say that the 15 million for the parking garage, that's a part of that circular connection, or the circular connection is tied to 44 million?
Yeah, the bridges would be in the 44. Yes.
So as we run out of a little money, the bridge could be done differently and save $1 million or $2 million.
Well, I would say not. You know, we have an allowance in there for a pedestrian bridge. Whether it can actually afford to pay for that circle bridge or not is an open question at this point. But I would say telling us to make it a not circle bridge doesn't probably mean that we can lower the budget by $2 million. I would not recommend that.
Okay.
Yes.
Does the parking, would the hotel have its own structured parking?
Presumably. Presumably the hotel is going to want dedicated parking, and the parking structure that we're proposing in this location probably would not be suitable for the hotel in the sense that they would want their parking to be closer to where their physical hotel is, because hotels are notoriously unwilling to ask patrons to walk even half a block. So likely that would be on-site parking for the hotel.
Even though the hotel would be across from the 4th Street garage? And
That's another question, and that's not a question. That's not the question you asked. But yeah, they might want to potentially see if it's possible to tap into the 4th Street garage.
Well, let me rephrase the question then. Would the hotel take up the entire block between College and Walnut on 3rd Street, or would it only take the block, half the block closest to the convention center? The 4th Street garage is on the east side of that block. How big do you imagine the hotel to be?
I'll give you a conditional answer to that. If it was just the hotel and not any parking, it would probably be built on half a block. If it was a hotel with built-in parking, it would probably take the whole block.
Okay, thank you.
So what is the advantage of this scenario over a similar scenario, except where the hotel and convention center are flipped, where essentially the convention center would be to the east and the hotel to the north?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we explored all those scenarios in our design charrette. The one you're describing is what we called option 4 east expansion, where you can see the Monroe Center here, the Convention Center expansion directly east, and then a new hotel on the parcel to the north. That's a viable option. We didn't think, I know I say we, I mean we collectively, the steering committee and everybody who was in the room, didn't think it was as good as the option that was brought forward, but it is a viable option that probably could work. The two main disadvantages to this versus the one I was showing you are, one, the convention center expansion, which, I mean, let's be perfectly honest, when this is built, you know, this is going to be the convention center and this is going to be the convention center annex, right? The convention center, the new piece is removed by a block from the B line, so it's a disadvantage in that regard. It's also removed a block from the town square, which is up here, which is also a disadvantage. But again, I want to say this is a viable option. We just didn't think it was as good as the option we brought forward.
Thank you.
I just add that the Beeline connection and association was really good with both of this. As it was built against the Beeline, there's actually a found space that's a third of a block that becomes open space along the Beeline park space. One of the recommendations was, don't do this for future expansion because people will love this so much, they won't let you expand later.
But the same thing kind of applies, that same argument applies to the hotel there, where the hotel could benefit from the Beeline frontage.
When you go back to that previous slide, what is the relevance of the Hyatt? It said it was disconnected from the Hyatt.
Well, 'cause there'd be there'd be another hotel in the way from, between the Hyatt.
So the Hyatt on Kirkwood?
The Hyatt would be there.
So in this diagram, you can see we could physically connect the current Hyatt Place Hotel with a hypothetical bridge, which is not in the budget. It could be physically connected to the new convention center. If we expanded to the east, that wouldn't be the case.
It'd be more closely connected to the Graduate then.
Yeah.
Not physically close, as, we couldn't physically connect with this. I mean, I think it's an interesting advantage that you have another flagship hotel, kind of automatically right next to the convention center with that expansion too. Yeah. The Graduate is happy, it's going on.
Yes.
Could you speak to the importance or lack thereof of those pedestrian tunnels above the street? I mean, do we not want to promote our first floor?
Yeah, I'll give you another weaselly answer to that. As an urban designer, I am not fond of pedestrian bridges. However, as a convention center designer, I can tell you they are absolutely essential for marketing these facilities, because when the meeting planners come around and they look at your facility, if it's not physically connected to the hotel, they mark you down on their little clipboard and you don't get as many conventions. So it's, as much as it pains me as an urban designer to do, you know, what I often derogatorily refer to as gerbil tubes, they are absolutely essential to make these projects work from a meeting planner and convention marketing standpoint. And I'm sure Talisha would be nodding vigorously.
Thank you.
New council?
We're ready, if you guys are done, we can.
I thank you, David, for this, and I
Sure.
would just add, you know, we have great prospects ahead. I urge that the sense of time is important to move forward with this.
Agreed.
We were ready to plan the design in July, we've moved that back, but I think it's time to move forward, and it looks like we're ready to go.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.